and I'm going to take us live. Okay, perfect. So hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're both on Zoom and on Facebook Live. So we're excited to be having this conversation today. Welcome to PAC's Palestine Monday series. It is on a Wednesday this week, but this book talk is really part of that series where every month we try to highlight Palestinian authors, speakers, scholars, or just people who can teach us more about Palestine through their personal and professional work. For this month, April is Arab American Heritage Month, and we wanted to make sure that we highlighted a Palestinian scholar and activist and someone that we all can definitely learn from. And so we were lucky enough to meet Dr. Hani Khouri at our conference, which we host, a virtual conference, which we hosted in March. He was kind enough to share his book with me, and I read it, and I definitely knew that I wanted to have a discussion with you about this book and spread more awareness about your work. And so we're very excited to be hosting and welcoming Dr. Hani Khouri today, who is a professor of mathematics. I'm going to just introduce Dr. Khouri very quickly, and then we're going to get started. I prepared some questions. We're gonna have a moderated conversation, and then I'm going to open it up for any other questions or comments that people want to share. So Dr. Hani Khouri is a professor of mathematics. He is the founder of the Department of Mathematics, Science, and Informatics at Mercer University's College of Professional Advancement in Georgia, USA, and served as its chair from 2006 to 2013. He was born in Nablus, Palestine in 1965 with a rare and progressive physical disorder known as spinal muscular atrophy. Hope I pronounced that right. A neuromuscular disease that sentenced him to an electric wheelchair at the age of 18. Despite his disability, he decided to come to America to complete his higher education. He earned an Associate of Arts degree in Mathematics and Science from Ondonga Community College in 1985, a Bachelor of Arts degree in Mathematics and a Bachelor of Science degree in Systems and Information Science in 1987, a Master of Science in Computer Science in 1989, and a Doctor of Philosophy in Mathematics Education in 1995, all from Syracuse University, New York. You have many degrees. That is very impressive. I'm trying to get my third one and I'm worried about it. So it's very, definitely deserve a round of applause for that one. Dr. Khouri has a much more extensive bio, but just for the sake of time, that's kind of the part that I wanted to share with everyone. He is also the author of the book that we are going to be talking about today, Giving Up is Not an Option, Memoirs of a Palestinian American. I'm going to put the link to get the book in the chat in case anyone wants to order it and read it. I highly recommend that you do. So without further ado, Dr. Hani Khouri, thank you so much for joining us. Before I get into the questions, is there anything you want to just share, introduce yourself with everyone?
I just want to thank you very much for this opportunity. It means a lot to me. And I want to thank your community center, the Palestinian American Community Center, and all of its members. I've enjoyed tremendously your conference back in March, and I'm very happy to be back.
Yeah, thank you. We're happy to have you. And hopefully this is just the start of many conversations. So I have just a couple of questions I want to start off with. And actually, before jumping into just the actual book, do you mind just introducing yourself a little bit for us? A little bit, just take us an overview maybe of kind of the main things that you touch on throughout the book, since we can't really discuss all of it, and then I'll get into my specific
Sure. Basically, I was born in Nablus in 1965, and I grew up mainly for the first 18 years of my life under the Israeli occupation. And then when I finished my high school, I had to decide on whether, about my future, what needs to be done. And I basically had relatives, and I had my brother at that time at Syracuse University. And that made it a lot easier for me to make that decision to continue my higher education in the United States. I've heard a lot about the laws pertaining to peoples with disabilities in the United States. And I thought that I could give it a chance and risk it. And I did it. And I arrived in the States August 12, 1983. And I went to OCC, Onondaga Community College, for a couple of years. Then I went to Syracuse University, remained there, and till 1994, when I got my job here at Mercer University after finishing my PhD. While in Syracuse, I met my wife Diane, and together she had a previous marriage, and so I began my fatherly duties and as a stepdad, and then we moved to Georgia, to Macon, Georgia, to Mercer University in 1994, and I've been teaching at Mercer since then. The book that I want to share with you is basically about my life and the experiences that I had while I was growing up in the West Bank in Palestine, and then basically also about my life here in the States and the transition that I had to make and I was able to make. Obviously not alone, but with the help of many others. I mentioned most of the names that were influential in my life in my book. So basically I started this project about 4 or 5 years ago, and it took me a while because of the amount of research I had to do. It's not just basically my own story, but the references and the citations and the research I had to do to support my narrative, which took a little while. A lot of pictures in the book as well. So I wanted to make this book a personal, give it a personal touch. And so far, I'm very happy to say that it has been well received. It has been nominated to receive an award by the Middle East Monitor in England, in London. So I'm spending a lot of time talking about my book and talking about the issues that I had to deal with.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I was sharing with Dr. Fudu earlier that part of what I enjoyed so much, especially in the beginning of the book, is so much of that personal history and that personal narrative that really shines through the book, especially just through the pictures and just very openly sharing parts of your family with us. So I appreciate it, and I really hope you get that award. If there's any ways that we can support, please let us know. I'm gonna take us through this journey that you outlined in the book, and we'll do it chronologically. So to start off, you start off your book talking about being born in Palestine 2 years before the Naksa, right? So you were born in 65, the Naksa happened in 67. Can you paint us a picture of what life in Palestine was like when you were growing up, and how the Naksa affected you or your family, if it did at all?
It certainly affected my parents, especially my dad. My dad was working then as a branch manager of a Ahli Bank. It's a Jordanian bank that had branches across the West Bank, and he was the branch manager in Nablus. And once the West Bank was occupied by Israel, they shut down the bank, and therefore he really had to rely on a reduced salary while being able to survive the family. That was probably the most family, most like impacted by the occupation. As I began to grow older, I began to see, soldiers, Israeli soldiers patrolling the streets of Nablus, the West Bank. Everywhere you go, there's a military presence. And then obviously I grew up with demonstrations, people, Palestinians demonstrating against the Israeli occupation. And, there are national holidays that were commemorated. And every time, students at my schools that I attended, they chose to go out and protest by, throwing stones at passing Israeli army jeeps or settlers, and then confrontations occur between the soldiers and the students. This is the kind of these are the memories that I have about how the occupation impacted us as a Palestinian community. Personally, I have two experiences that were kind of dramatic for me personally. One of them was when the Israeli soldiers decided to invade the school, King Talal. I was almost 16 years old. And when the soldiers invaded the school, usually before they invade the school, they will throw colored water on demonstrating students outside, around the school, in order to identify them later on for arrest. And And obviously, because of my disability, I was not able to participate in any of that. So I was always remaining in the classroom, sitting, at my desk, not able to move anywhere. And when the soldiers decided to invade the school, they invaded the school, and they were patrolling. They were getting actually into each classroom, trying to identify the rock throwers. And the turn of my classroom, soldiers entered, and one of them asked the class mates to stand up, all of you stand up. And I could not stand up. My disability prevented me from doing that. And if I could, it would have taken me 5 or 10 minutes to do so. So I remained seated, and the soldier, came to me, and he told me, "Stand up, you animal! I told you to stand up." And and then at that time, he slapped me a slap on my face, and my teacher jumped in, and he said, "Please leave him alone. He has nothing to do with anything. He has a disability." And I could see the look on the soldier's eyes and face, and it's like, he never apologized, but he just moved away from me and went on with his business. And this was one tragic incident that affected me, I think, in many ways. The other one is when I reached the age of 16. If there is an Israeli family or that has a person with a disability, a son or a daughter, there are laws in Israel that allow for the family to import a vehicle tax exempt. So the family will be exempted from paying taxes, and everyone knows how expensive these taxes are. It's probably higher than the cost of the car itself. And because we were not obviously Israeli citizens, but we decided to apply anyways. So my dad applied at the military headquarters at Beit El near Ramallah, and we were asked to come to a meeting. And the sergeant that met with my father basically asked him, "Well, you're asking us to exempt you from paying taxes to import a vehicle for your son who has a disability, but can you tell me what have you done for the state of Israel?" My father said, there's nothing I will do for the state of Israel in return of anything. You're occupying us. So at that moment, the sergeant said, application denied. So at that moment, I began to witness firsthand the Israeli apartheid. I mean, that to me was the beginning of Israeli apartheid, because again, I was born with a physical disability, and I felt that I should be treated equally like anyone else in that area. And after all, we were under Israeli occupation. We were not, a free, independent state. So.
Yeah, I mean, first off, I'm sorry that you had to go through both of those incidents, but I think, like you said, that literally speaks to the definition of what we mean when we call Israel an apartheid state, right? Is that these different rules and this very discriminatory segregation of, well, you can have it if you've done something for Israel or if you're Israeli. But and I think, thank you for sharing those incidents, because I think that also proves sometimes we focus only on the political effects of things like the Naksa and the occupation, but we forget about the effects on education, the effects to students, the effects on people who might be differently abled or disabled. And so these are all important reminders of how the occupation is not just about taking over the land, but it's really about, the control of people and what they can and can't do. Yeah, I wanted to, to kind of, well, and I read this in your book, and I actually want to ask this before we jump into our next question, because you mentioned, the vehicle, and you mentioned how as you got older, not having access to things that you needed, being someone who is disabled, because the Israeli occupation forces wouldn't allow you, hindered a lot of what you could and couldn't do. And so I kind of wanted to go back, to the question of, was that part of why you ended up moving here? Was that part of what made that decision for you to move and not stay there?
Absolutely, and that was a big part of it. But also, the fact that the U.S. has been known for laws and accessibility and laws that protect the rights of the disabled, I think that was the right choice to be made. Yeah.
Yeah, got it. Okay, so I wanted to shift to a slightly better note. Could you share your favorite memory of Nablus with us before we shift into you coming here?
Well, I have a lot of good memories and favorite memories in Nablus. Certainly, as a child, I loved to play marbles, and marbles was there are different games that one can play with marbles. Although I could not walk at that time, effectively, I used to crawl on my floor to be able to play. My neighbors, my friends would come to play marbles with me around the house. That was a favorite. My best friend was a Muslim, and his name is Jamil from the Jamil Saqf al-Hayb. And during Ramadan, we will always have iftar together. And on occasion, we would do a barbecue in the back of my house. I have lots of good memories of going to swim in the Mediterranean Sea, which I love doing. And I've talked about those memories as a child in my book as well. I used to, my family will take us on trips to my dad's village that I enjoyed a lot. Trips to other cities within the West Bank and within Israel proper. And we had relatives in Nazareth, so we used to love and visit with them. It's just, again, it was the life of a Palestinian living in the West Bank at that time was very much restricted by many ways by the Israeli authorities. But I do have very good memories. And of course, the memories I used to have with my friends at school. I had wonderful friends at school, and every time, demonstrations took place, they would carry me on their shoulder to the principal's office to make sure that I'm safe. They've carried me on, around the school just for the safety. We would have breakfast sometimes early in the morning at school, where we would, my dad will, on the way to school, will stop and buy falafel or hummus, and take it to school, and we will gather as friends and eat it together for breakfast. All of these are great memories. I mean, it's just the fact that I was born with a physical disability did not really prevent me from enjoying the social aspects of living in Palestine.
Yeah, and those are important memories for us to keep talking about, because like we were talking about earlier, I think Palestine has just been is only talked about in the context of occupation and struggle, but there's so much beauty and richness in life that we need to also remember. You started kind of talking about it, so I want to shift us into the question. We're going to get to your least favorite memories after, but I think these might coincide. If you can expand a little bit on the political context of growing up as a disabled person in Palestine under Israeli military rule. Did it affect how you started sharing a little bit, but did it, affect how you grew up at all, or what you were able to do or not do?
Well, again, it's just the fact, being born with a disability and not having, my dad did not have enough means to purchase a vehicle. But when I reached to the point where I had, for high school, he was able to afford some money to buy a used vehicle. I wish that I was able to get that tax-exempt free vehicle, which would have allowed my life to be a lot more convenient. I could have done a lot more things. My dad used to have to borrow a vehicle from his nephew. He was a dentist in Nablus, and whenever he was in his clinic, he will just borrow his car to take me places, and sometimes to borrow his car to take me to school or back from school, along with with my cousins. So it's really, the overall climate was that of restrictive movement, restrictive, if anytime you want to, go to swim at Israeli beaches and in Israel proper, you go to the beaches in, near Tel Aviv or in Netanya, everybody looks at you as, with suspicion because you're speaking Arabic. You begin to feel, alienated in your own land, in your own in your own zone, and that's in a way restricting. That is very, it makes you feel awkward, makes you feel that although you have the feeling of belonging, there are lots of things happening around you that would love to uproot you from your place and your living.
Yeah, and those are the mental effects of occupation, right?
Yes.
Like exactly what you said, it's your place of home and belonging, but you feel othered and you feel like you're made.
I mean, for example, Palestinians could not, even at school, could not raise the Palestinian flag. Anytime that students raise the Palestinian flag, we would be held hostage at school until that flag comes down, or until the Israeli soldiers invade the school and bring the flag down. So there was no way for us to celebrate even our national identity. Everything I experienced, pointed at crushing the Palestinian will. But unfortunately, that did not work. I don't think it will ever work.
Yeah, I don't think so either. And that's why we're still here talking about Palestine and still existing like 70 plus years after. And I think that speaks to a lot of the resilience of Palestinians who are still there, or like you moved here and continue to talk about Palestine and all the aspects that they do. So what can you share? We asked about your favorite memory. Can you share some least favorite memories of life in the West Bank?
The least favorite memories are the ones that relate to tear gas, they relate to invading schools, being kind of at home sometimes, wanting to go places but couldn't because of my disability and because of the lack of transportation. So all of that made me think about a future elsewhere. So that's the reason why I made the choice, and my family and my parents have always been encouraging along the way. And I think without their support and without their believing in me, I would have never been able to make it to this country. But they really gave me the same exact option that they gave my siblings. And that is, if you want to go to college, we're going to support you and try to our best to make it come true. And they really stood behind me all the way. And I'm very happy to have been able to achieve what I have achieved. Just to say thank you, or to present them with 2 words, thank you. And that's the best I could do. Therefore, I kept them always alive in my mind. Every time I attempted to do something, I gave it my best shot.
Yeah. And to kind of shift into you moving here and starting your journey here in education. And I actually think it's pretty interesting, like so much of your work here is tied to education. And you've mentioned a couple of times already about schools in Palestine being raided, or, you don't have, it just makes it very evident how even children in Palestine don't get to enjoy school and education because they're constantly, being watched or threatened by Israeli military occupation. And so you moving here, I guess, what was it like? What was that journey moving to the US and starting? And I guess I really want to focus on being aware of your dual identity, being both Palestinian, but also coming here for resources that you couldn't get elsewhere. What was that kind of experience like?
I've always been a proud Palestinian. I'm always a proud American. I think we have great values in this country, and we have a great tradition. And I really never struggled with a dual identity. I am a Palestinian American, and I take my American citizenship very seriously. I have rights and responsibilities. We have a wonderful constitution. We have wonderful laws, especially when it comes to the laws that protect the rights of the disabled people. So I really never struggled in that regard. I've always told people where I'm from, where I came from, and I'm always proudly going to say I'm a Palestinian American. I believe that these 2 words carry with them lots and lots of values that I keep and I hold dear to my heart. And only if we could maintain those values, that's something I wonder about. How can we maintain these values regardless of where we come from. I think that in the end, we have a responsibility to make sure that the country we live in works to its maximum benefit to humanity.
Yeah, and I guess the question kind of talking about dual identity, because a lot of Palestinian Americans do struggle with the dual identity, with with knowing in the back of our minds that this country, America, is one of the country that most highly funds Israel, right, which is occupying Palestine. And so I guess was there ever any of that like coming up when you first moved here in academia? I know I've struggled talking about Palestine in academia, and we were talking about it a little bit earlier. So were there any of those moments, and if there were, how do you kind of mitigate them, and what advice do you give?
Yes, there were, but mainly within an academic context. I'm very highly critical of American foreign policy in the Middle East, I think, as many other Palestinians who are living in this country. It's not a secret that everyone knows Americans stand on the Palestinian struggle toward independence and the one-sidedness that the US government has toward Israel. I think it's not a secret. Everybody knows that. And I think that I was able to articulate my thoughts within that context, and that is that America is my home. I mean, it's my new home. Palestine is my mother home. I refer to it, I refer to Nablus as my mother city whenever I write, but where I live is my home, and I want to make the best out of it. And making the best out of it means that I need to engage. I need to be part of the process of educating others. And as I'm very happy to be working and growing in an academic environment. And even at my university, I mean, everyone knows I've invited many speakers who spoke about the Middle East and Palestine, Paul Findlay, Mark Ellis. I mean, many others I invited to Mercer who spoke about the conflict and the different aspects of it. But in the end, I think that we should all be proud of where we come from, where we came from, and we should be proud of where we are. That does not mean that there are areas that do not need improvement. Always there is a place for improvement. And I think that as an educator, I play my role as an educator. And so I present my narrative with all honesty and candidacy, and I hope that others will learn something from it.
Yeah, and that definitely shines through in your books. For anyone who's tuning in, I definitely recommend buying it and reading it. And I appreciate that reminder too, that like as someone myself who grew up here, this is kind of the only place that I know to live, but we can be critical of, like said, foreign policy, and kind of use the sectors or the spaces that we are part of to bring awareness and to make a change. Yeah. Let's talk about Palestine.
I mean, in the United States, I was able to drive my first vehicle. The technology I was able to rely on is highly sophisticated, but it gave me my freedom and independence. Yeah. So I was able to drive for 30 years. And that's a long time to be free and to experience life, in ways that I could never experience before. So there are, there are some great things about America, and there are not so great things about America when it comes to foreign policy. And foreign policy is a big deal to Palestinians, because we're always looking for justice. And that justice does not seem to be coming from the US government toward the Palestinian people.
Yeah. But we can hopefully bring that change generated, and that freedom that you are finally able to feel. We hope that everyone around the world will be able to feel. There is a question in the chat, so I want to get to it, and then I'll get back to some of the questions that I shared with you earlier. So the question on chat is, knowing what you know today, and with all you've been through in Palestine as a disabled person, do you think today, 2020, is still hard on disability in Palestine, and what can we do about it?
Today in 2022.
Sorry, 2022.
It's. I went to the last time, or let me give you a context again. The first time I've been back to Palestine, to my birth city of Nablus, was in 2018. So I left there in 1982, and 1983, and I came back for the very first time in 2018. That's 35 years. So did I notice any change? I went back to Nablus and I spoke at Al-Najah University to the families and students with disabilities. There are 148 students with disabilities at Al-Najah National University in Nablus. And I meant to go there and give them and share with them my story to encourage them to continue their education and to persist and to graduate from college regardless of all the challenges that they might face. That was the reason I went back and I met with many of those students to tell you today that the situation is a lot better than it was when I was living there. So it's a lot better than it was in 35 years ago or so, 40 years ago now almost. So the reason I'm saying that because I was able to witness to people with electric wheelchairs, roaming the streets of Nablus. I was able to see that. Unfortunately, there was not public, there was no public transportation or taxis that are equipped with wheelchair lifts. That is still not happening there. I think there's only one taxi. After I left and I raised this issue, the main taxi company in Nablus, Al-I'timad, they finally made one vehicle with a lift in it or with a ramp. But people's attitudes are resilient. Palestinians are extremely resilient. And I wanted to share with them my story to encourage them and to ask them to persist and to reach their dreams. I noticed there are lots of ramps around the university, so there was not an issue for me to move from one building to another in the university. So there are organizations, Palestinian organizations, that cater to the needs of the disabled. So every city has its main organization, and there's a national organization that kind of puts them all under one umbrella. So there's a lot more awareness about the plight of people with disabilities.
The name of the organization with us? So
yes, I can share it in the chat. Ittihad al-Mu'aqin, I can share it in Arabic and I'll try to translate. اتحاد المعاقين لذوي الاحتياجات الخاصة, that is the name of it. Basically the organization for those with special needs, and it has branches in every city. I'm familiar with the ones in Nablus, but there are branches in Tulkarem and Ramallah.
Yeah, so if anyone, and we can link it too in the chat, and so if anyone would like to support or get to know the organization more, I can also put it on for people viewing on Facebook. So I want to shift into education, because that is a big part of who you are and what you've done, and you have many degrees, which is very impressive. And you mentioned that education saved you and can save many, and so can you expand a little bit on that and how and why
Yes.
you believe so?
I think I've always believed that education is the best insurance policy we have to live in dignity in this world. My dad, at a very young age, used to tell me, and I will never forget that. He said, "Hani, I know you were born different than others. As your dad, I never wanted to see that. But remember one thing: everything can be taken away from you. You can lose your freedom to move. You can lose part of your health. You can lose your homeland. You can lose a lot of things, but you cannot lose your education. It is something that no one can take away from you." And I've taken these words and I grew up with them along the way. Everything, we are subject to losing a lot in this world. But one thing we cannot lose is what we know and what we learn, and that is education. So I think that it is the best insurance policy. It is also the best tool to communicate with others and to establish a common ground for a common humanity. I think that education has the power to put us all on the same pedestal, and that is the pedestal of humanity. We're all human beings trying to live in this world with dignity, with pride, with hope. And I think that education allows for that very, in a very powerful way. So I'm a very strong believer in education, and I've committed my life. I've been at Mercer for almost 30 years, sharing my story and my journey with my students to tell them that, hey, there is something common that unites all of us, and that is our humanity.
Yeah, and just coming from someone I'm also very passionate about just learning, but also educating and teaching. I think that's one of the most powerful things we do. And going back to talking about Palestine, right, is we can figure out ways to educate younger kids and then also older people about Palestine, the reality of what's going on, and just like the beauty and the richness of Palestine. I think that makes a big difference too. What is your advice kind of on that note to young people or young adults growing up in the US, maybe specifically Palestinians growing up here and kind of exploring who they are and what they want to do?
I think that they need to know and learn more about certainly the historical narrative, the struggle and how it began, and knowing the roots of the struggle. And obviously, they need to become more active in civic society. I think citizenship education is very important, and engaging and activism is really important in attempting to make change within in society. So I think that learning and the desire to know about the Palestinian history and the dispossession, what the Palestinian people had to go through, is essential for them to be able to participate in a meaningful way and in a democratic society. I think, after all, we live in a democratic society, and we should do our best to preserve democratic values. And so I encourage them to engage and make change within their own circles.
Yeah, definitely. And that's something that we at PAC are always trying to encourage people to do, to get more engaged, to get more active, and just really put our name out there too. And so if anyone is interested in doing any of that work, please just reach out to us. I have a question just out of my own curiosity too, but I also want to just put it out there. We have about 10 minutes left, and so if anyone in the audience or tuning in wants to ask any questions or has comments, please put them in the chat now. But I want to ask how you got into math, like at the field, I guess. How did you get into that field, and where does the passion for that field come from?
I think that math is about problem solving, and I've dealt with problems throughout my life. Some of them were related to my disability, and others were related to freedom and the plight for freedom. So my life had in it certain challenges, certain problems, and I think that the best way to deal with problems in general is to learn how to become an effective problem solver. And I think mathematics lends itself to doing that. If you want to become a good problem solver, if you want to look for opportunities, for ways to deal with challenges in life, hey, maybe mathematics can do the job. And I think that mathematics does the job, because in a way, when I solve a mathematical problem in the classroom with my students, they begin to see the honesty and the beauty, the inner beauty of mathematical thinking, in a way that they can take some of that and shift it toward their individual lives, their personal lives, to overcome. And that's exactly what my book is about. It's about overcoming disability, overcoming challenges. And I think mathematics, I've always enjoyed it as a student while I was young in Palestine, and I still enjoy it today as I teach it and share it with others. And I think that if you want to have honest citizenship, citizenship requires honesty. It is not sufficient to have an ID to be a citizen. In other words, a citizen must show his or her citizenship by being honest and by being engaged. And without honesty and engagement, I think we lose a huge and big sense of what citizenship is all about.
Yeah, very true. You also just gave me a whole new outlook on math. I am not a math person at all. I'm completely on the other side of the field for scholarly work, but I never thought of it in that way. And so it's definitely a good way to think about it. I appreciate that. I want to just give some time if anyone has any questions or comments for Dr. Furi before we wrap up. I don't see any more comments on Facebook. So for folks on Zoom, if you have anything, now is your chance to put it in the chat. And I guess while people do that, I just want to give you some more time for any like closing thoughts or remarks or other things, Dr. Furi, that you'd like to share with people tuning in.
For those who are going to read my book, I welcome your questions or suggestions. This is my first edition, and I'm hoping to do another edition next year or the year after. So I welcome any suggestions or thoughts that you might have. Once again, the reason behind writing this book was to not give up hope. I think that none of us should give up hope. I think hope is part of the journey. Hope is part of the struggle to achieve freedom and to achieve more of it in more meaningful ways. So regardless of how tough life might get, in the end, we need hope. All of us need hope. And I think that sharing this story with you and sharing it with others will give you a perspective on how I was able to overcome the many challenges that I had. There were some downfalls, there were some setbacks. I'll talk about them in the book, but in the end, I live by hope, and I hope to die by hope.
That's a beautiful sentence. I love that phrasing of it. We have a PAC hosts a class called Hope, Holding On to Palestinian Existence. So I'm going to use that quote for that class next time we teach it. We do have a question in the chat that I'm going to read out loud. Did you have unusual difficulty with Israeli authorities when you applied to leave Palestine? That's a good question.
When let me just get clarification. You mean when I left after high school, or when I left the last time I went back? Well, no, I did not. When I left Palestine in 1983, August 12th, 1983, I did not have any difficulties. I had an I-20. I had an acceptance from a college, U.S. college, and I took that to the U.S. consulate in Jerusalem, and I was able to obtain a visa, and I was able to leave without any problems. And even when I went back in 2018, I entered through the Jordanian border to the West Bank. I had no problems. I used, and I talked about it in the book, I used a manual wheelchair instead of an electric wheelchair to minimize the time of waiting, because if I had used my electric wheelchair, I'm sure that inspection will probably take hours for them to clear the wheelchair. So I decided to use a manual wheelchair. Obviously, I had someone who traveled with me from here all the way to the West Bank and back. And so I was able to enter and leave without any problems.
We're glad you were able to without any problems. There's one more question on the chat, and I think we might end with this question. So speaking of problem solving, how do you advise our community to address the misconceptions that surround disabilities, and what advice do you have for our communities regarding, speaking about people who might be disabled or just differently able people?
Right. When we talk about disability, I mean, it's one word, or people with different abilities. It's really, you're talking about multiple worlds. I mean, someone with a physical disability in a wheelchair does not necessarily go through the same things that someone who's blind or has other types of disability. So there are different types of disabilities. But in the end, think about it this way: each one of us represents himself or herself as a world. Each one of us is a world. And I think that the more we share from our worlds, our own worlds, with others, the better the bigger world will get. So I think that, disability is definitely had its lots of challenges. For example, being able to drive a vehicle, being able to form a family, being able to attend college, being able to become independent, all of these questions we all struggle with. But I think that when you have a physical disability or another kind of disability, then your questions will intensify. And finding solutions to these questions or answers to these questions gets more challenging, and therefore it requires more patience. But in the end, do not be afraid to ask people about their disabilities. I welcome any of my, I told my students, I tell them all the time, if you want to know more about my disability, feel free to ask. Anything you want to know, I'll be happy to share with you. Because again, I'm living within the context of education. So students have the right to know. They want to know, they're curious. I enter the classroom and they're going to wonder, how am I going to teach? What tools I'm going to use to teach them? And as much as they're curious about me as the instructor or as the teacher, I'm also curious about them as individuals. So I always encourage a climate where dialogue, where people can exchange freely their ideas, their questions, as long as we're doing it in a respectful manner. That's the essence. If we're able to do it in a very respectful manner, then there's nothing wrong with asking questions. Some people might think these are personal questions, but they're not. You're curious. You have curiosities about me as a person with a disability. What kind of challenges did I have to overcome to become a professor? At Mercer. What are the steps that I had to go through to get there? I think that asking these kinds of questions will probably help others make better choices in life.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, I think that's important. Just ask people, right? And doing it in a respectful manner, of course. But and so much of what you said reminded me of one of my favorite, activist quotes. One of the Zapatista quotes is, "We want to work towards a world where many worlds fit," right? So it's not about everyone being exactly the same, but it's about everyone being able to fit, being able to belong and be free and happy in this world that we create. And so I very much appreciate you sharing that with us. I don't see any other questions on either platforms. So I just want to, on behalf of everyone at PAC, and I want to thank everyone who tuned in. And I really want to thank you, Dr. Khoury, for sharing your book with us and letting me read it and having this conversation with us. And we really hope you get that award. If there are other ways that we can support you or just kind of continue elevating that work that you do, please let us know, and we'd be happy to.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a great night, and hopefully we'll stay in touch.
You too. Thank you.